What is going on, everyone? James Hancock here, back with a review of episode 6 of season 3 of True Detective, an episode called Hunters in the Dark. This episode was co-written by series creator Nick Pizzolatto as well as Graham Gordy, and we had Daniel Sackheim back in the director's chair. But more importantly, viewers who have been patiently waiting for a major breakthrough all season are probably smiling ear to ear right now, because without a doubt, the best reveal and cliffhanger all season was at the end of tonight's episode. Part of the fun of True Detective is the speculation machine which surrounds the show, but I feel like a lot of people are going to have to completely wipe their theories clean and start from scratch, but there are going to be a few people out there who are patting themselves on the back. But before I sink my teeth into all that, I did want to share some quick news related to the show. Both IndieWire and Deadline had some interesting quotes from HBO's programming chief, Casey Bloys, where he acknowledged that he's been incredibly pleased on a creative level with season 3, and that each episode is getting around 8 million views. Now that is far more than what I've been reading. If you look at Wikipedia, it'll say around like 1 million. But I'm assuming that this 8 million figure includes all views across all platforms, not just on the night the show airs. But when asked about a 4th season, he had an interesting quote. He said, "Nick, I think, is percolating ideas, and I think we'll approach it the same way we did season 3. If he has an idea he's excited about and wants to write, we're open to that, but I'm not going to rush him. I'm not going to say, we need something in January 2020, so hurry up, because I don't think you get a writer's best work when doing that. So I think right now, Nick is enjoying the response to the show, that it's been well received, and then we'll take his lead." I think that's absolutely the perfect attitude to take with this show, because the reason season 2 sucks so badly is that they rushed it into production when they weren't ready. But Casey Bloys also had some interesting insights when he was asked about whether or not HBO would ever consider making a season of television available all at once for binge watching, or possibly making their shows available exclusively online, and he responded, "I believe that the way we do it, to me and to our creators, is the best of both worlds. The thing that's nice about a weekly release is that you're in the cultural conversation for 8 to 10 weeks. You have an entire industry of people who write about and critique television and enjoy doing it. You engage with your fans on a weekly basis. I don't think you get that benefit when you release things all at once." Personally, I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love this philosophy. Speaking for myself as someone with a YouTube channel, I definitely prefer tackling a show one episode at a time. You just get a chance to do a much better deep dive into each individual episode. Granted, you need a show that's so well written that it's worth that extra time and effort, but I'm thrilled to hear that HBO will be sticking with this strategy moving forward, and people who prefer to binge can always chill and just wait a few weeks until more episodes are available and then dig in. But over the last couple of days, I've been reading tons of theories that have been floating around about True Detective and who might have been responsible for what happened to Will and Julie Purcell. Nick Pizzolatto at one point even jumped on Instagram to shoot down one theory that it was actually Amelia who was responsible. But I think after tonight's episode, people are going to have a lot of fun talking about the upcoming episodes 7 and 8. I mean, this show is almost done, unfortunately. But I feel like the story picked up some major momentum on a bunch of fronts tonight with interesting developments all across the board. But starting in 1990, we see how the Attorney General is doing everything in his power to railroad Tom Purcell, until Roland calmly points out that at this time, they in fact have no information that would justify an arrest. That said, Hayes and Roland do play ball, and they aggressively interrogate Tom until he just falls to pieces. He's so vulnerable at this point, he might as well be an open wound. Hayes isn't buying this theory either, but in private he tells Roland that they should work this angle in order to clear Tom's name. So they start looking under every rock. They talk to Tom's old boss from 1980. They hear about his drinking problems, how people didn't get along with him. They also find a note in Tom's home suggesting that he was grappling with being a homosexual and staying in the closet. For those of you who weren't around back in 1990, let's just say folks were a little less open-minded about that back then. We also get a pretty gripping scene which takes place in 1980, which hammers home just how frequently Hayes has been forced to swallow some official narrative, aka total bullshit about the case. His frustration is just palpable throughout the entire episode, and we see how in 1990, the case is already starting to wreak havoc on his home life again. Amelia's work on a sequel to her book only escalates the tension between them. One of the more unnerving scenes this episode is when Hayes and Roland hunt down Harris James, who is now Chief Security Officer at Hoyt Foods. Clearly his role in framing Brett Woodard paid off, and he's already bought the new narrative about Tom, and he claims he saw him lurking around the crime scene of the shoot back in 1980 before the backpack was found. There's a lot about Harris James that is off, and I don't know if he was using this as a way to distract Hayes or not, but Hayes gets visibly annoyed when Harris compliments his body. Clearly Hayes isn't into that at all. But as many folks have pointed out, Amelia is actually arguably the best detective this season, and she finds a girl who knew Julie quite well. She tells Amelia how Julie seemed incredibly confused about who she was. She kept calling herself Mary and was frequently mentioning this pink room and a queen in a pink castle. As we saw in the final scene, this clue is absolutely vital. But my favorite scene in this episode has to be the one from 1990 when Hayes and Roland talk to Dan O'Brien in a cafe. Dan is a junkie now and he's looking for a huge payday for info he claims he has about Lucy's murder, not an overdose, which was the official story. But Mahershala Ali is so calm in the scene, but his body language is so menacing. And the line that absolutely made me howl is when he tells Dan, "I speak crazy. I'm fucking fluent." Like, from the way Ali says the line, I completely believe it. But as fun as that scene might be, this episode wasn't exclusively about the case, and we get a really moving scene in 2015 between Hayes and his son as Henry's talking about his possible plans to go to New York, and we see Hayes in a really clear moment talking about his days when he committed some acts that many deemed to be very courageous. Back in 1990, Hayes and Roland have one of their frequent arguments when Roland tries to drive Hayes home just to call it a day. Hayes is not remotely interested in spending time at home, and he goes on the prowl. And that evening, he determines that the drilled hole in the wall in the Purcell home was most likely used for passing notes between the kids, all those little notes that we saw in earlier episodes, and he shares this information with Roland in 2015. This scene was particularly heartbreaking. At one point, Hayes leaves the room to take a leak, and when he returns, he's completely caught off guard when he finds Roland studying Amelia's book. At this point, Hayes' short-term memory is just completely disintegrating. Toward the end of the episode, we get two breakthroughs, one major, one minor. During a reading of Amelia's book, a black man with one blind eye confronts her about Julie's whereabouts and accuses Amelia of milking other people's pain. I think it is safe to say he is one of the two ghosts that met with Will and Julie in the woods back in 1980. But the biggest breakthrough so far is thanks to Tom, who is stumbling around in a drunken, emotionally distraught state. After he overhears a conversation at the police station about requisitioning Lucy's phone records from the hotel, he confronts Dan O'Brien with a gun. And they fight and they roll around, and Dan finally tells Tom that it was the Hoyts who were paying Lucy back in 1980 and how they were the ones who most likely would have had a problem if she suddenly asked for more money. That's how Lucy was able to afford leaving Tom in the first place. So Tom goes and breaks into the Hoyt mansion. He stumbles downstairs. He's got a gun out in front of him. I think we all needed something concrete at this point, and I was absolutely relieved when Tom flips the light switch, and sure enough, this giant pink room is staring him square in the face. But what follows is absolutely bone-chilling, where Tom kind of looks bewildered into the camera at something we can't see, and he says, "The hell? Julie?" Like it's like two questions. And over his shoulder, we see Harris James sneaking up behind him. And the sound effects were just so effective. And it just, overall, the scene was incredibly eerie and unnerving. And it cuts to credits. It's the kind of scene that will have people just chewing the edge of the carpet, waiting for next week's episode. But at this point, what do all these revelations mean? My theory as it stands is that the Hoyts kidnapped Julie to essentially be a surrogate family member for a bereaved daughter. But at some point, they essentially threw her away, which is why she suddenly pops back up in 1990 as this lost soul. I suspect Lucy was taking money from the Hoyts to look the other way, because at that point in her life, booze and drugs were far more important to her. But as to what Tom might have seen, perhaps there was a strange picture or video or a work of art in her likeness, and I imagine it was probably tied to some sort of cult or other clandestine organization, one that abuses kids but uses the Hoyt charities as a way of identifying potential targets. Something tells me this story is going to be a lot bigger than just Julie Purcell. And that right around this time in 1990, when Hayes and Roland learned of at least some of this information, Dan O'Brien and Harris James had to go down. Now, this is all pure speculation on my part, but that is what my gut is telling me at this point. But this show, if anything, has proven to be very surprising and very unpredictable, so I imagine the next two episodes will be quite a roller coaster. But I think that's all I have for this evening, so I hope you enjoyed my little rant. 6 episodes in, I feel like this season's done an amazing job at undoing a lot of the damage of season 2 and winning back a lot of fans from season 1. And I just can't wait to see how it all wraps up over the next 2 weeks. In any event, if you enjoyed this review, please consider subscribing to my channel and giving this video a like. I would really appreciate it. If you want to talk about the show or anything else, you can always find me on Twitter at Colbrax, and there's a link in the description below. But thanks again for watching my video. Much obliged, greatly appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.